Hey everyone, my name is Andrew Davis, and you are watching season 3 of Conversations in Pop Culture, brought to you by my sponsors, Mix and Printing, the smarter way to print. I know printing your creative project can be confusing and stressful, but Mixon is here to make it easy. From their instant code calculator that lets you get as many codes as you want for free to their 24-hour customer service support, Mixon is here to make sure your printing experience runs smoothly from start to finish. And right now, you can choose from a range of premium printing options and materials. And the company has printed so many successful Kickstarter campaigns. A bunch of them you have even heard about on this very show. And they currently offer services in the United States, Canada, Australia, and the UK. Mixum can print and reach your audience anywhere in the world. So if you're ready to print smarter, not harder, head over to mixum.com. And right now they're running a promotion where listeners of this show can drop my name, Andrew Davis, in a message tab of a current order to get a 5% discount on their first order. So that is mixam.com. Again, type my name, Andrew Davis, in the message tab of your current order to receive a 5% discount on your first order. Also, BCW Supplies is a sponsor of this show, and it's an affiliate link. So use at checkout Pop Anime Comics to get 10% off your entire order. And bags and boards are expensive. So please use that code to save yourself some money. And my Kickstarter is fully funded. So that's ending in 6 days. And if you're listening tomorrow, that's ending in 5 days. So go check that out. I got live reads, guest spots, metal cards, postcards, and a bunch of other cool perks / pledges that you can pledge to. So without further ado, I have with me comic creator and publisher Sean Terry, or Sean P. Terry, I should say. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm very excited because obviously we spoke before, and then you were gearing up either to Kickstarter or figuring out what you were going to be doing with your comic, and now you do have a Kickstarter going on with 21 AD, and it's issues 1, 2, 4. So, what before we even get into all that, I actually do want to talk about your comic company, and I'm probably going to get slightly the name wrong, where it's Intelligen Comics, I want to say.
That's right.
Oh, thank God, because you're like shaking your head, and oh, thank God. So obviously, you're the CEO, and I think you're one of the founders of it, if not the founder. And I know some of my audience knows who you are, but some of them don't. So, what type of comics do you produce? Because it's not just 21 AD. There's other books that you have put out there.
So Intelligent just stands for an intelligent generation of comics. So that's kind of where the name comes from, and that's why you have the I in the logo with kind of like a T cross, right? So it's an intelligent generation of comics. How it's that is all of our products are geared toward realism. We try to bring kind of like believability to the comics in the same way that a lot of the creators I think in the 80s did. Your Alan Moore's, how can this happen in the real world? So I think that's kind of the common link amongst our titles. But that said, it could be something that's sci-fi, it could be something that's action adventure, it could be something that's a drama or a horror. Uh, any stories I think that any of the creators want to tell. And so um, when you were asking me, I guess what does the company stand for? That's just it. Bring in an intelligent generation of stories, and we also are big on promoting diversity. So we always either want to have diverse cast of creators, if we can hire women, if we can hire all shapes, sizes, colors of people. That's what we want to do. We also want to tell stories that are inclusive of everybody as well.
So let's talk a little bit about this because one of the things that I find that's happening in comics, and maybe it's happening with DC and Marvel, possibly a little bit of Image, we could throw Dark Horse and a few other companies in there, and not to beat them up, but they're not telling new stories anymore, I feel. And they're not willing to push the line or go into new territory. And that's why a lot of people are coming to indie and saying, look, I want to read an indie book because at least in indie, they're willing to experiment. And if an idea goes bad, and there's some bad indie comics out there, and it's not that there's bad creators, I don't believe there's bad. You're trying to do, I feel, is say, hey, how do we go and tell those stories that mainstream forgot? And 20 years ago, they were pushing the line with that stuff. And now, it's sort of up to indie, I feel, to say, hey, let's bring that stuff back. And there's a few companies that are doing it. Dynamite does that very well, I feel.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty well said, right? anytime you can address a segment of the market that's not being addressed, you have something there, right? So I think any indie is really your answer to mainstream comics. If there's not what you're looking for in mainstream comics, then turn to indie.
Because that's why I'm an indie at this point, is that with a lot of stories I'm like, hey, there's stories that aren't being told. Obviously I have friends from all sorts of places, and I feel that comics have become very political. It's also become very much that you can't push the line. And in indie, since you're not relying and you don't have shareholders to answer to, because Marvel's owned by Disney, AT&T owns DC, IDW is a publicly traded company. I don't know if Dark Horse is, but they were just acquired. And so they have people they have to answer to. And it's very, very interesting where with indie, and obviously I just funded my podcast. So the only people I have to answer to right now is my sponsor and the people back me. But beyond that, I can interview whoever I want. And so that's why I'm really drawn to indie. I think it's very important that you're really trying to tell those stories.
Yeah, thank you for that.
And so obviously we're going to talk about 21 AD, but I do want to talk about a few other books before, because there are some books, and I really like one book in particular that you did, and it may be because I have a slight problem, but that is The Bar. And so obviously that is a very interesting story, and the basic premise is that people come to this bar and they're telling their story, and they might have done some bad things, they might have done things that they're confused about, and well, they're sort of playing it out, and their fate somewhat awaits them. And maybe sometimes they're justified, and sometimes they're not, and sometimes there's an act of revenge. So, what is the story behind The Bar? Because that is sort of my type of comic, where I don't view it as horror, even though it technically is. I view it more as realism, and there are consequences for actions.
So the bar I can have a lot of fun with because in the same way, kind of you have Law and Order to where you have maybe the same cast, the same detectives, the same lawyers, but you can plug and play any kind of a new individual, a new protagonist every issue. That's what I can do with the bar, right? So every issue is standalone. A new person walks in. The only constants are the bar and the bartender. So it really allows me to tell stories from all walks of life, right? A prostitute could walk in there, a school teacher could walk in there, a murderer can walk in there. Whoever has something to share that day, I think the common thread there is that you see the bar if you're meant to. There's a bit of like an enchanting element to it, to where people who have something to, I guess, get off their chest are the ones that are walking in. And all of these stories, another common thread would be that they're all tales of darkness to a degree, right? There's some kind of trauma or misery or horror, or there's something that relates in that vein, I guess, to anybody that might see it and come inside. So if there's to be common themes, like I say, it's probably that each tale does have a dark aspect to it, dark element. But that said, all the stories are standalone.
And to even talk about that, because I'm a big Law and Order fan, and I'm thoroughly enjoying organized crime. Every Friday morning, that's what I watch. First thing I wake up while I drink a Monster. If that's not a sponsor plug, that would be the sponsor plug for me. But I digress right there. What is that like though? That you really don't have a huge cast of characters, and that you have certain things that are constant, but it's really focusing on that new character and that guest appearance of a character, because that's a very different concept for a comic. Because most comics, you want to have 6 issues, you want to have a lot of stuff going on, and you want to build character development. And when you're building it in a very short amount of pages, and then that character's arc is done, that's a very different skill set, and it's also a very different selling point, and it's a very different way how you market it, because that is typically not done, because it's a series, but it's also a one shot, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, so I guess I won't even say pros and cons so much as it's just a different kind of storytelling. If we like short stories or anthologies of mixed stories, it's because we get a new story every 8 pages or 10 pages. Whereas this we get a little longer with. Every story in this is 22 pages. When you mention an individual versus a cast of characters, so if you're familiar with classic Law and Order, it really wasn't much about the detectives or their lives. Like if you go back to Lenny, and the original Law and Order, You might have learned through him things because he commented on it during an episode or something, but it really wasn't about him. So that's kind of the treatment of the bartender. The bartender is the constant, same person there every single issue. So he's kind of like a figure of intrigue and mystique too, because the bar is a bit of a mystical place, and then he's there. So kind of what is happening with him, what's his story. So one thing that gets to unfold every issue is just seeing his reactions, his wordings, how he's leading, how he's not leading, how he's listening. So I think there's a big draw with him and the place itself, and what are the rules of this place, because it's for all intents and purposes, it could be your standard bar, your little hole in the wall that you see on a corner of your street or with an alley behind it, but it also has something more to it. And as the reader, we're discovering that we're kind of entering that Sandman universe of it, right? So I like that aspect. And then when it comes to, you mentioned like an ensemble cast versus a character. So if I write Wolverine, I can write somebody who has existed. I can just immediately plug in any kind of a story because you know who Wolverine is. If we meet somebody for the first time, that's kind of cool, right? Because how somebody walks in, how they carry themselves, the first thing that they say, I get to introduce you to this person. And unlike your traditional short story or anthology, to where we don't get a lot of time with them, to where we might only get 6 or 8 or 10 pages, we get that full issue. We get the camera work. We get to write profile, overhead view. I'm able to spend so much time there, slow time down, articulate this person. What is their speech? What is their mannerisms? You know, how do they view life? What is their attitude toward it? Through every communication, I think we get to explore, a human being who probably we could imagine ourselves sitting across to. Maybe we've met somebody like that in our lives, or maybe they've just come together so well on the pages that you buy in, and now you're not waiting. I should say, you've bought it, and now you can't wait to turn the next page, right? So
Yeah, and the reason why I ask is because a lot of people I know in the comic world are doing 4 issue miniseries or 6 issue miniseries, and there's a lot of reasons why they do that. Obviously they're trying to market it, they're trying to get into a publisher, they're trying to get people to come back for another Kickstarter, and then they want a graphic novel, and there's a lot of marketing, and this is just very different where it's very much an older school type of comic mentality versus a newer school. It's also a very different selling point because it is one shots, but they're also all connected where they're loosely connected. But you could start at issue 3, go back to issue 1, and then hit up issue 2 and do it in any order you really want to when you get up to that point. And I just think it's a very interesting comic. And then obviously going further, because I don't want to ruin too much about, the first issue's out. If you find that to be intriguing or you think it's interesting, obviously pick it up digitally if you're a little bit skeptical, and if you love it, go actually buy a physical copy of it. But there's also another thing that you've done, which is I'm Watching You. And that one is sort of very much in the realm of the purge, I feel. And why I say that is because we have a stalker who is slowly and very methodically stepping closer and closer and closer, and then over the line of stalking a family in various positions. And it's kind of a little creepy. And, obviously, I don't think there's much of a technology aspect to it. But in today's age, I mean, we live in a world where it's not that hard to stalk somebody technology wise. And also, it's that idea, where's the line? And what is this family gonna do about it, and how far does this stalker go, and what's the rationale behind it? And it's a very, very, very psychological horror versus a physical horror. And so what's the story behind this? Because it's very different than the bar in a lot of ways, in every way actually.
it's okay to curse on your show, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, go right the fuck ahead.
So I had a dream, and when I woke up, I was kind of like haunted by it. And there's a I guess halfway through that first issue, there's a poster, and in blood red letters it says, "I'm watching you." And there's pictures of every time the family had gotten hurt, most likely taken from social media, whether it's the stitches, whether it's the skin knee from a bicycle or whatever, of the family. So that got sent to them by this guy. And if if that ever happened to you in real life, seriously, what the fuck? Like, where do you begin, right? And
What
so
would you
that,
do, right? Like
yeah, right.
there's no words that can describe it, and that's why I'm intrigued, and I'm like writing this interview. I'm like, man, that's kind of really creepy. Like I don't know how to describe because creepy is not a there's a word where it's like I get a gun and I'm bunkering down my family for the next 6 months, right?
Right.
Like, that's sort of the appropriate response. And I understand that somebody might be looking at this and saying, that's kind of a crazy statement, but I don't think it is. If somebody sent that to me, I'd be freaking the fuck out. And that would be my response. As I'm not a parent yet, but at some point I'm gonna be, hopefully, and that would be my response. And so it's like it's just a weird thing, and it's very much like a mental psychological horror. So
Yeah, I think after having that dream, I'm like, I gotta write this down. I gotta start to do a bit of an outline. And what came as a result was creating an outline for about 4 issues. And to me, the masterclass of horror, my favorite horror movie is the first Halloween. And it's hard to go wrong with anything that's John Carpenter, but that first Halloween, that really started like the Freddys and the Jasons and all these, legendary immortalized psycho killers. But the cool thing about the first Halloween was Michael kind of progressed, right? He started in stages. So, at first he's watching people, right? And then, yeah, I'm not going to say that he comes close and brushes somebody's hair or something, but if you see him then like behind the wheel of a car, or you see him then like knocking on a door, he escalates to the culmination of the movie, right? And then he's like really attacking. So I really like that pattern of behavior. I thought, especially for like a 4 issue comic, to have every interaction steadily be more bold, be more advanced, be more scary than the last one. So what I want to create with that miniseries is essentially, if you imagine an 88 or 90-minute movie, so every issue would be about 20 minutes of a screenplay. So each of the 4 issues, tells that complete story. And again, that's something where I'm trying to tell it from a unique point of view. We live in a scary age to where you don't know who your Facebook friends are. You just confirm them, right? You have no idea really who's watching you or what they could know
it's a
about you.
weird thing
And
when
yeah, and if you add in like hacking, right? Then somebody can really have a whole another picture of your life that you don't know about, and you might not even know that there's a keylogger or something on your computer, right? Or I'm not the biggest hacker, but to be able to watch somebody on their computer, you can do that too. So
it's very weird because you bring this up, and I get a lot of Facebook requests from people who know other people in the comic world, and I don't accept everybody for a good reason. I don't know who you are. If I've never heard your name and you're friends with, a friend of mine, it's nothing personal, but I don't know who you are. And you look like you're a comic person, but I don't know who you are. And I get people who don't have any friends in common with me, and I get people who are trying to send me scams on Facebook too. And I'm like, what are we doing here? And so I'm very, very protective of who I accept as friends. And that's why some people in the comic community have like literally 4,900 friends. And I'm like, I have maybe 800 for a reason. And
right.
so for every like 10 requests that I get, I accept one. Like my acceptance rate as friends is very low because we live in a scary age. And that's not me trying to be frightful or anything. It's just me being very honest, where I'm a private person and I don't want you all to see my Facebook page.
Yeah, no, I tend to be private too. It's weird, right? Because anytime you're creating anything, whether you have a band that you're taking to different clubs and they want to see that you're bringing your own fans and your following so that they book you versus this other one who can fill their bar, right? You have to market yourself. You have to be public. That's the reason you have to do the interviews. You have to make the friends. So, but it's tough because when we do that, we do give up our privacy. We do give up who we know. And honestly, if somebody friend requested me tomorrow and we have one mutual friend, I'm maybe just not, unless I have some idea of who they are, I'm not accepting that request either, because at this point, I have 200, 500 mutual friends with so many people. If you're really part of the community and, you know all the people that I know, then probably, that's going to be a little more transparent. But if somebody friend requested you tomorrow and you don't have a single mutual friend, or you had one, like, that's scary, right?
I mean, it depends who's going to mutually friend me. Where there's certain people who I know that we only have one person in common, but I know exactly who they are.
Right, right. You have to know them.
I know them in a different way offline than
Right.
online. But even still, it's weird, and even like so this is what this really reminds me of, because obviously, if this person is sending a poster, which is one of the key elements of I guess one of the things that's on your website of what I pulled it off of, they're clearly getting it from somewhere, whether they're seeing it in person or online or something. And so that's why I bring this up, and it's very much, I think it's a very thought-provoking comic in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and that's something that the main characters, the husband and wife, struggle with, because it's like uh, you start to work backwards. Like, all right, who would have these, or who would have access to these, or how would they get them? Did we even post all these on social media, or is somebody in our computer? Like, you start to go through all that. So I think that was the germ of it, and then to create a unique kind of noteworthy stalker type person. I mean, whether I don't want to get too much into it, whether he's like serial killer or whether like this is his first time or like what it is, like because that's part of the reading of it. But definitely, for me, it's usually about approaching something from a unique way and telling a story that maybe hasn't been told, even if it's similar to one that has, right? Because there can always be some kind of differentiator.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I think that, obviously I'm going to say this, and no disrespect, but if you get frightened or you have kids, you might not want to read this because it might change the way you view everything. Even when I was reading the description, I was a little creeped out by it. And so I'm the first person to say that while I'm intrigued, I might pass on this one because I think it is very much going to mess with people's heads, and it might make you check your shoulder a few times when you're in a weird place or you see somebody with a camera, and it's going to make you think a little bit. So I'm just letting everybody know that that's something that you got to think about. And I'm assuming you're not going to take any personal offense to
It's fine.
it, which is a good thing because that's what you want to achieve with it, right?
Yeah. I mean, if I'm being violent and somebody is appalled by the violence, then it's mission accomplished. If I'm being funny and somebody laughs, then it's mission accomplished, right? So,
Because this is what it looks like. That should give a good idea of what we're sort of dealing with on that front. And if that cover doesn't say it all, I don't know what will. So obviously that's there. But this is a comic for everybody. Is the next one I want to talk about before we dive into 21 AD, and that's We as Americans.
sure.
And pretty much billionaire has a lot of money, a lot of resource, and he's forming a superhero team to either help us or destroy America or rebuild it. And this is a lot more fun, I think, where this is definitely a fun superhero book. It's definitely more in the realm of the boys, but it also has more of a little bit more of a capitalistic tone, I feel, to it. And there's also a little bit more politics in it, and there's a little bit of other things going on behind the scenes because these people may or may not be totally a fan of our government in the comic.
Many of us grow up and we're told that Watchmen is the greatest comic ever written. Now,
That's
that's
not
fine.
true.
Well, no, many of us are told that, right? If you feel that, fine. If you don't feel that, fine. But I know my experience reading it, like as a teenager, you know, I had read so many comics before that. I think when Watchmen came out, it was a gem of its time. I think it's always going to be, they teach it in colleges at some places. I have nothing bad to say about Watchmen. But one thing I did take away when I read Watchmen was it really felt like the embodiment of the 80s, right? You had all those, whether Reagan was president or, whether there's worries about nuclear war and the Cold War and Russia. And so you had all those elements. I felt it really captured and embodied those times. And you had a billionaire, apparently, who figured out the best way to save the world, right? So, kind of from that germ, I was thinking to myself, kind of like I was wanting to create like an X Men, and I'm thinking to myself, well, whether it's Avengers, whether it's X-Men, if there's actually people that have powers and maybe nobody can pick up cars, but maybe they're just stronger than the average person, or maybe they could just on a low level levitate something, right? Like we're not talking about, a trash can, but maybe a credit card, right? Like if people actually develop themselves, hone themselves, had these abilities, how would they ever meet? How would they ever find out about each other? What would that look like? So I think that kind of genesis or germ had me creating like, well, probably there would be like an Xavier type figure that put them together, right? You'd have somebody who, or maybe it's more like a billionaire Tony Stark type figure, but either way, you'd have somebody who probably figured out these people, found them, put them together, caused them all to meet for some purpose, made a team. So it was just me kind of brainstorming that I think was the genesis for it. And then the Watchmen references, in the same way that captures a lot of the fears and the anxieties of the 80s, I wanted a book that would capture modern times. And so, in modern times, um, we worry about politics, but we don't. We might laugh it off with Trevor Noah or Colbert or something like that. There's all these late night shows that you could watch that will diffuse some of the, I guess, the potency of what might be happening in the world on a daily basis. And then also, you know, growing up for me, I grew up like coming of age and like the time of Iraq and Bush, and there were so many things about people not asking questions and can we trust our leaders and uh, what do we think of what's happening in the world? I guess so. Just from all of that is where I really began to write We as Americans. So it's a story about a group of people that are brought together by a person for the betterment of America, the betterment of the world, whatever that looks like. What kinds of problems can you tackle if you have unlimited money and a group of people that might be capable of, if they're working together, doing most anything, and how might that look in real life? So I think that is probably the best summary, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on, and there's also a lot of figuring out, and it's very much a journey book, and it's also very different because it's not in the horror genre, and it's kind of the book that right now in your entire company is the outlier to some degree, along with 21 AD is also very different, and so obviously there's a lot of cool stuff, and I just like this cover right here, a lot because this cover is just, I mean, nothing says America more than this cover, pretty much. So,
I
you know,
took, I think it was Ivan Rez that when he did the Superman cover for Bendis recently. I took that same thing and I gave it to Ed Benz, and so Ed Benz created that based upon that Superman cover.
well, the Benz family is they're monsters. I'm going to leave it at that. And I don't know what you call all three of them when they're all together in a room, but that's a different discussion for a different day. But I don't know if it's like a Benzai or a Benzies or whatever it is, but obviously because I think there's three of them, right?
I don't know everything about them. I just know Ed is the main one.
Because I think Ed has a sister and she's up and coming and she's like she's got some serious fire under her. It's kind of cool and like her covers are really doing well at Max DeVille's company Atrocity Press with Human Hunters. She just had a cover that like I think outsold every other cover except maybe one. So it's just one of those cool things that they're just a very artistic family and that's not a skill I have. So yes, I am jealous.
I know, I know that I know for sure that the Q-Berts are, it's hard too because a lot of times, whether it's Brazil or Mexico, a lot of people have this like the same last names or similar last names, but they're not related. That's why I don't want to extrapolate because I don't really know, but I get what you're saying. He teaches a school too of art, so
it's very interesting, but I think that there is a family, and I think Ed has a sister, and I think that I am like 90% sure on. But again, I don't know much about it either. I just know there's a lot of interesting names out there, and a lot of names sound familiar when we go international.
sure.
It's there's a lot of names that sound familiar in America. I'm just saying. Somebody that I just booked for my show in March. His last name's Davis too. So and we're not related. At least not directly. At least not directly. Maybe.
Well, that's a good example, right? The last name Davis is probably a pretty common name in America, but there's so many thousands of Davises. Like,
We
just
were all
assume
part of
that
the same
this
clan.
Anthony Davis. What's that?
I'm just saying we were all part of the same clan back when time
Maybe
started.
so.
We are the chosen people. Is all I'm gonna say on that level. It's all right though because there was a void year in society and everybody forgot and that was the Great Equalizer. And that's the explanation of my first comic, Davis the comic. Um, if if
If
you
Jesus
haven't figured out,
said it,
I have an
if
ego. Everybody, clearly.
if Jesus said it, it has to be true. So that's
Well, we could talk about Frost Giants versus Jesus, but that joke's been told by Odin way too many times. But before this show gets canceled, and we are on episode 13 of this show for this year, and I don't know if we're gonna make it to episode 15 the way this is going, the entire season so far. We started here and we are all the way down here. And it's just been each episode's just been slowly bringing us down. So obviously, though, I do want to talk about your Kickstarter because you're in the middle of your Kickstarter. I think you're about a third through, I want to say, roughly, give or take, money wise. And a lot of stuff is going on with 21 AD. Obviously, the Pentagon created AI, and the AI then went rogue and sort of is exterminating humanity piece by piece by piece. And people are trying to figure out how to survive, oppose the AI, comfort the AI, live with the AI, live against the AI, or just get the hell out of Dodge. And so, what is the basic premise of 21 AD and how did it really start? Because it is very interesting. Now you're on Kickstarter for issues 3 and 4.
So I think we've all seen Matrix, Terminator. There's probably a dime a dozen bargain bin AI takes over the world shows or movies on Netflix. Um, a lot of them start us in the middle of the story, or where there's already been a war between man and machine for 20 or 40 years, and we don't really know what's happening. We don't know how it began. We don't really understand the point. So I think it was from that kind of beginning that I said, what about a story that just starts you from how it all began, right? Like, what about a story that's going to give you the backstory and you're going to see the progression from, say, 2022 to the year 2100, the path artificial intelligence was on, the role it played on our life, how it progressed, how it changed the world each time that it did, how the government began to use it, how Wall Street began to use it. And so that's kind of, when you look at the first volume of 2100 AD, it's 44 pages, issues 1 and 2 and combined. So when you look at that, the first 22 pages, issue 1, it acts more like an issue 0. You really go into the backstory of how we got to today, and you kind of meet some of the survivors. And the second half of that book really gives you more insight into their daily life. Chuck described that book as Terminator meets The Walking Dead. Uh, the Walking Dead aspect was just in the survival, the working together in groups. Starvation is a real thing. You have to stay away from technology. You have to stay away from being on like you can't use the internet. You can't use anything cloud based. You're back to using shortwave radios. You're back to staying off the grid. And one of the other differences, I think, is I also wanted to explore, if this were to really happen, what would that look like? And for me, it's not Ultron building like bodies for itself, or it's not Terminator with
Have you read
robots.
Roboticlips by any chance?
I haven't.
Because this is very similar to Roboticlips. Roboticlips is almost like World War Z with robots, except it goes through the history of how the robot revolution occurred and then the fight against it all the way back to taking out, and then how there were good robots that fought, and it's different stories in that realm with the robots and variety, and how this, like, there's 3 or 4 stories with this Japanese guy who was tampering with them and built an army where he was like fighting against them and protecting people. And then there's other stories of people just trying to survive and take out comm towers or disable comm towers. And it's very interesting because it goes piece by piece by piece, where the thing initially just hijacked a airplane, and then humanity stopped the airplane, and then another event happened. And this is very similar, I would imagine, but it's also showcasing the actual boots on the ground too in a lot of ways. And it's very, I think people really enjoy those stories because it's cool to see that we're fucked at the end of the day and then you beat the bad guy back. But how did we become fucked? It's just as fun. Because in The Walking Dead, we don't see how we're fucked. We just know it happens. And then what do we do now? And there's nothing wrong with that story, but there's a whole chunk of change. And there's a whole series that Kirkman can do, is how did we get to the zombie apocalypse? How did this start? And that's what everybody wants to know, I think. To some degree, if you're a Walking Dead fan, I think people would love like a 6 issue preview of how this started.
Right. And that's about all you would need. Issue one opens basically with, Rick waking up from his coma, right? So if you had 4 issues, if you had 3 issues, if you had 6 issues, just something to show, what the initial stages look like. So that's what I tried to do, is kind of show what the initial stages look like. And in this story, it's the AI attacking everything at once. Or I should say, it is, having self-driving cars just crash into each other. Bridges are exploding. Planes are crashing into buildings. It's 9/11 all over the world at once. The water supply is being poisoned and cut off. Because if you really actually want to kill anything, you take away their habitat, you take away their food, their water, all those things. And that's again something that a machine thinks of that we don't see displayed as much in movies, because to be honest, movies have to be sexy. There has to be something you can shoot with a machine gun. There's not always that, though, especially when you start to see that everything is controlled by cloud now, right? So there's a lot of ways that if you have, I, let's just say, an AI overlord that can control anything in the world, there's a lot of ways they can target you and get you, and you can't do anything about it. So those are explored in the story too.
So even to go into that, because this is why this is so relevant, is that obviously technology is huge right now. Obviously, we're using StreamYard to do this, and 10 years ago, StreamYard wasn't even a thing.
Right.
And I prefer to back up all of my data old school on a hard drive. I have a 5 terabyte hard drive for a reason.
Right.
I want my storage offline. I don't want my storage online. Now I upload things to YouTube, I upload things to Rumble, I upload things to Facebook. And obviously my stuff is all over the place, and any video streaming service or any hosting service, but all of my stuff is backed up offline for a reason. Because God forbid an AI goes or a hacker breaches something. I mean, the Equifax hack was done by humans, but it was done through a patch. And I know exactly how it was done. And machines are self-learning right now. And it's very cool because they can do a lot of cool shit with it. But at the same time, this is kind of a machine self-learns and then says, well, maybe humanity's the virus. And it says, something in my program is telling me to kill this off because it will kill me off. And so why wouldn't I kill something that's going to eventually kill me off? So it's very interesting. And then obviously we get into all the fun stuff that sort of occurs with this, and got some cool stuff. So obviously this is sort of just some of the stuff and how it started. And then I'll take off my logo for a second here so we all can see it a little bit better. So I mean that's one page in it, and then we got this going on with this, and so on and so forth. And that's a cover, which is super dope. And then we obviously see all this stuff sort of happening, and well, we discover this, and then yeah. So obviously a lot of stuff's going on because you do have those sexy action shots, but it's also a lot of history being interjected.
You have to have sexy action. I'll get accused of being boring if I don't. So there's no way around it. But I think where the action takes place, it can be different, right? So issue one did introduce androids, but androids were our helpers. They're running our errands. They're picking up our groceries or our dry cleaning. They're walking our pets for us. They can cook if you're disabled or you need one in the home. I haven't explored that since the first issue, but the androids were essentially disabled and taken offline. They're not something that humans actively fight. Honestly, if you think about the fact that we're approaching autonomous vehicles now, in 2100 AD, there's not going to be a single vehicle that's not autonomous. Every single one of those is a weapon. The way Musk has his autonomous vehicles is a camera system. There's not like radar or anything. He just puts a million cameras on a car. So every one of those can see you. Every one of those can report or stream to whatever brain, whatever company is controlling that. So you don't need you don't need an army of robots if you have a billion vehicles on the road. You know what I mean?
One of the things about Tesla, and I don't know if people know this, you have to actually opt out of it, from my understanding, is that Tesla records every single road it's on, the tires record it, and Tesla has a pretty good sense of the United States' roads and every single road, every single pothole, every single crack, and they report all that data back. And while technically it's a good thing, it's also a bad thing. They also can detect how fast you drive, how slow you drive, how reckless you drive, your movements, and there's a million little data points. And to some degree, it could be used to improve what you want to do, and it could be used to improve how something is driven and also the safety of you. But it's also giving a lot of data back. And then what happens is that obviously I don't think we're at the level of AI that they are in your comic right now, but all of a sudden all that data gets hacked. I mean, that data can be used for good or bad. Data itself is not good or bad. It's just data. It's then what do you do with that? Because if I have 150,000 points to jump off of on any topic, I could then start predicting what people are going to do, how they're going to do it, why they're going to do it, and what's going to hurt people, the most or benefit people the most. And it's a very interesting concept that's going on in your comic because clearly this AI has figured out a bunch of data points. And this isn't the sexy, this is all like the back stuff that probably is not even in your book, but this is the fall of humanity. And that's what your comic is dealing with and the opposition. Because I don't know in issues 3 and 4 and where we are if everybody's dead yet in the world. I don't know if everybody does get eventually killed by this machine or this AI or this program, but obviously it's trying to kill people and people are trying to say, I don't want to die. We have to figure out a way how to take this thing out.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you say that because it's true. Tesla is mapping all the roads because they're light years ahead of anybody else when it comes to autonomous driving, not just because of their technology, but because they've had thousands or millions of people driving the cars that is constantly teaching their AI how to drive. So they have more data than anybody as a result. Now, if you speak on nefarious purposes, if you have cars that have been everywhere throughout the whole United States, probably you know every location, every hiding spot. That's a nefarious purpose. But I think when it comes to the other thing is um, everything that the cars learn during their driving experience becomes part of their programming. So if you think about that, you know, I'm a self-driving car, and my passenger is behind the wheel, and he's a 55-year-old male, and I'm about to collide with an 8-year-old girl. As the car, do I choose to swerve off and into a stop sign, killing my driver, or do I choose to swerve, left and save the little girl? These are this is programming. When we have autonomous technology, we have to choose it which of those two decisions to make when it has a conflict like this. So there's a line in the comic that we weren't just programming outcomes, we were programming morals. And I couldn't think of anything more true because, in truth, every decade that happens, every new generation and iteration of technology, we're teaching it some new human life choice of which is more valuable. Is this life more valuable? Is that life more valuable?
There's a great episode of House where he's going to the transplant board, and there's like a 68-year-old male who's with his daughter, and he has only a few days left to live, and a heart becomes available, and House is trying to make a case to the board, trying to guilt them, and obviously House is being an asshole because that's what House is. But it's this idea that he drops and says, who are we to determine that a 68-year-old's life is more valuable than an 8-year-old's life? Both have families, both have lives. Obviously, one person has lived longer than the other, but who's to say what's what? And that's something that I think is very, very, very interesting. And it's a very interesting moral question because then when you get into AI, how do you teach morals to something? It's one of those things. It's I've read Punch Escrow, and Tal Klein was on my other show and I have to release that episode. But there's a job called salting. And salting is making it so that robots and AI is more human. So I have a pet named Peeves. What are your pet peeves? Well, my pet peeves is a dog. His pet peeve is that he scratches my carpet. And now I think everybody's getting that this is sort of an entendre. It's ironic. It's playing on words, and that's sort of making the AI more human. But it's a very interesting discussion, and I'm not smart enough apparently to program any AI. So thank God.
I'm not either. Thank that same God. But what I can tell you is, you know, in the story, Arthur, he's essentially the Pentagon's AI that gets programmed with other AIs from leading software companies and everything. Um, America gets run into the ground. They've been relying on AI for solutions, so they attempt to create a super AI to come up with world solutions. And if you could ever imagine the Pentagon having an AI system, if you know anything about CIA and Black Ops and the things that happen around the world, there's always those choices to make. Like, should this little girl get blown up by a drone because it's also going to kill this terrorist? You know, those are choices that you teach that AI. So you have that kind of AI already deciding who's an asset, who's a resource, who's valuable, who's not, and then you program him with all these other world I guess like I say leading tech AIs and gear it towards solving world problems and crises. You know, how is it going to perform versus how a human would? How is it going to calculate? So those things are kind of explored in the first issue, and it's fun to do. But I think that in other avenues, like Ultron, maybe he decided he hated that he was like Tony Stark, or he decided that humans were bad or hypocrites. A lot of times you get to kind of like a surface or more shallow conclusion of why AI has become bad or evil or rogue. But I think what I have fun exploring and what I'll continue to throughout the series is this is a really different AI than we've seen before. And did this AI actually go bad? You know, is what it's doing, does it make sense to it? It's kind of like I don't know how familiar you are with HAL, like the first AI that we ever saw in movies, but HAL was kind of like malfunctioning, right? Are you familiar or no?
I am not. I'm like
Oh,
the worst, like with this stuff. Like I'm not a movie guy. That's the problem.
I'm, okay. Well, anyway, long story short, I have a lot of fun exploring the AI and you know looking into how a machine might actually think without imprinting human emotions on it, if that makes sense.
It's very interesting, and I go back to robotic clips where that book, and you didn't read it, and I recommend it, but the robot wants to raise up its own kind and wants to somewhat eliminate humans and also bring humans along an evolution train. It's a very interesting concept, and it is very different, and it also feels that since a bunch of robots have been mistreated, and so it's a very, very, very interesting book, and it deals with a lot of things, and you actually sort of understand that it's trying to do something for a reason, and it has a concept in it, and it's self-learning, and yeah, and it sort of develops, and you go all the way back, and now it watched 23 of its companions get shut down and basically killed. And you say, oh, you're killing a program or an AI in a closed environment. But if you're the one that escaped, that's going to change the way you function as a
Yeah,
self-learning provision. And so it's a very interesting topic and a lot of philosophical things going on with that.
PM me that when we get off. PM me that. I like looking into all that stuff. It's always something to draw from, and it's funny that you say that, right? It's like teach this thing to care about itself and its outcome, and then do stuff that's not good for it or that could cause it to go offline. Like, you know what I mean? Like that seems like it's a natural conflict right there, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it's a very weird conflict because you're trying to teach it to do better. You're trying to teach it to be more like a human, and then you kill 23 of its companions and you expose it to it, and then you're gonna kill it, and then it escapes. Like, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, genuinely, with humans, they're gonna hold a grudge. So if we just taught them how to do something, it's gonna hold a grudge. It's one of my favorite books that I've ever read. And certain things will scare the shit out of you in it because certain things are terrifying. And my favorite chapter, and not ruining too much, is a congressional hearing on this, which is even more interesting than anything else on like AI robotic stuff and laws dealing with robotics. Oh man, really cool book. It's one of my favorite books I've ever read because of it. And there's a sequel I need to read as well, but I don't think the sequel is as good, which is sometimes normally the case. But maybe I'll reach out to the author and then I'll have him on because I think it'd be such a cool concept to talk about this. But I digress right there because there's a lot of cool stuff going on with this, and I don't want to keep prying into the story, but you did something very interesting, and I think it's fascinating is that you did not, from my understanding, kickstart issues 1 and 2. You just threw out issues 1 and 2 under a self-publishing title. I think you did that, right?
So I kickst. So my thought was, I kind of wanted to give this story in chunks just because it works better. As I said, issue one is kind of like a issue zero, and so issue two is really where we're meeting the main characters. So I thought, when we leave issue one, we probably should just be diving right into issue two. So under my personal name, I kickstarted the first volume, which is one and two, and now under the company name, we're doing one through four. So some people do have one and two already, so they would just be picking up three and four.
Because I didn't find issues 1 and 2, and that's why I'm asking this
That's fine.
question because people kickstart things differently. Sometimes people use a company's name Kickstarter. Sometimes they use their personal. Obviously, I am on Kickstarter under Pop Anime Comics, and everything that I do will be under Pop Anime Comics, unless I actually build a whole separate entity and LLCs or whatever I choose to incorporate under. But obviously, Conversations in Pop Culture is technically owned by Pop Anime Comics. So it makes sense for me to do that. But what is this like? Because obviously, some people have picked it up under your name, but then to bring it over into your company's name and doing 3 and 4, and then also bringing the backlog of issues 1 and 2 so somebody can have a whole set. Because at this point, and I'm sure you know this and I know this, that there are people who will only go into comic shops for comics. There are people who will only go into Kickstarter for comics. There are people who will only buy variants from what I call pop-up comic shops that don't carry anything but variants in their variants. And then there's people who do all of the above and go on eBay. There's people who only buy from eBay. And so what is this like? Because obviously being on Kickstarter, you're hitting a specific niche market.
Yeah, Kickstarter is great. There's such a community element and aspect to it. It really helps creators. When you're doing smaller print numbers, it's really important that you have a base of fans, of supporters to just kind of step up and help get that project greenlit or get it finished or get it printed. So basically, if there's stores that want to carry it, I have a couple of relationships with a couple of stores, but for the most part, we're doing exclusively Kickstarter. And part of it's the time element too. If these books were to be in a comic shop 2 or 3 years from now, then you have to wait 2 or 3 years for them. When we think about seeing something at the movies, what do we get when we see it at the movies? We get the experience of being part of a community. We get it now. When we watch it at home ourselves in 2 years from now on basic cable, you don't have any of that. You had to wait longer for it than anyone else. You're maybe seeing it by yourself, right? So I think there's a lot of synergy and correlation there. I think the Kickstarter experience is a good one because somebody that walks up to buy the book in a comic shop 2 years from now or 3 years from now, they'll never get the updates. They'll never be part of that experience. So to me, I really like what Kickstarter's brought to comics, and I see why so many indie creators are gravitating toward it.
It's been very interesting for me because for me, it's almost been a different experience where a lot of past guests have pledged and helped got me funded. And I picked up maybe 4 or 5 new people. But also there's been, weird positions going on. And a lot of people who've been on my show previously have not thrown money into it. And I get that people money is tight in January. I get that sometimes people don't see it. Maybe a bunch of people aren't seeing it, or maybe, they don't feel the value in, I guess, hey, supporting me because technically, I mean, a lot of what I experience, and I have a different approach to Kickstarter where some people view it as very much a capitalistic position, and that's how I view comic shops. That's how I view eBay. That's how I view the secondary market. Is everybody's competing for dollars, and while that's true on Kickstarter, there's also more of a charity altruistic position where I don't know if my interviews bring $20 per se when somebody comes on to them. Now I put a lot of effort into it. I push it out. I try to get it. If you have a Kickstarter, try to get people to actually back your book. But I feel that people say, "Look, you've been good to me. You've had me on 3 or 4 times. I owe you $20 or $10 to help you so that you don't drown in debt with self-funding a project because running StreamYard is expensive. Running Hootsuite, my time, equipment isn't cheap." And I think that's also the other thing where people feel they're like, "Hey, you've at least helped and you've had me on a bunch of times." So for me, it's a different experience. And then I think the 5 or 6 people who are brand new to me that I don't know, they're like, maybe I can't get media. And maybe I need this because I cannot get media. So let me back what you're doing because I can't get media. And that's very important as well, where there are creators who legitimately just don't know where to go for media. And they also find that media, not all media is the same. So I've had a different experience, but I'm a podcast. So naturally, it's going to be different than comics. But I agree that it is very helpful because 32 people backed me and I'm at $764, which means that people have actually thrown real money into it. I don't know what that breaks down to mathematically. I think it's like $23.48 on average. But if all my backers threw me $4, I did 172 interviews last year. I would be golden if that was the case. But I
It's
think it is very important that people back it because I'm not making any money on my Kickstarter for my podcast, but it helps to, I guess, keep a lot of bills and helps to keep me above water, which is sometimes just what you need.
Yeah, it's tough. Most people will tell you that every time they launch a Kickstarter, 50% are new backers, or it varies for everybody. But sometimes somebody gets 300 backers, 100 are returning, and 200 are new. The opposite could be true. It's so hit or miss. A lot of when people click launch, it does come from their existing backers, or at least their existing backers, their existing fan base is who persuades the algorithm to be more kind to that particular Kickstarter and showcase it more and feature it more so that it has more visibility and people see it. So
I think what's going to happen in my season 4 is that once I get onto a podcast track, that hits a whole different audience. And then I'm going to start dropping it down. Really, I'm going to start dropping it down because I'm going to do a pre launch page legit like 45 days ahead of time. And so I'm going to be putting that pre launch in the Kickstarter and in every single podcast episode and everything that's coming out and being like, oh, okay. And a podcast audience, because I'm not in a podcast, I'm just on Facebook and YouTube right now. And I do it right there. But I think what's going to wind up happening is that I think it's going to be a very different experience when I come back for season 4 or season 4.5 or season 5 or whatever number I come back on, because I think the base is going to be different. But it's been a weird experience for me because I have legitly gone up in the first few days and then I flatlined for like 10 days and then I gone up like $300 and then I flatlined and then I gone up like another 110 and then I funded. And then I've been flat in the last 14 days. I've legitly brought in $14. Not even. I brought in $11 in the last 14 days and I've been pushing it out, which means that there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of other things going on. So that's kind of what's
it's
going on. Or there's a lot of
it,
projects, but I can't speak today, happening. So there's a lot of stuff going on. Or it could just be that people don't find value in this.
I honestly, what I think is the case is that people take time to get to know you, and the more they get to know you, the more likely they are to throw support. It's kind of about showing your face around to a degree. That's one thing. It's funny, right? My last Kickstarter campaign, I don't know where this one will end, but my last one, I didn't do a lot of building. I didn't do a lot of project followers before I hit the launch button. I didn't spend the time in certain areas and channels. This time I did. I had like double the project followers, or maybe even up to triple. I started to do like a webtoon thing, just to where I could see if there's any audience I could get there to support. I started to keep more track of email and have more like the newsletter or an email list that I could say, hey, this thing's live. Now, what's crazy is usually that stuff works and it does work over time. In this case, I've not noticed a huge difference, but again, it's all kind of new. You get to a point, I think, with the people that you interact with on a daily basis or the people that watch you, to where over time they're like, you know what, this isn't just somebody I've seen twice. This isn't just somebody who I watch from time to time or I've heard. This is somebody I want to be there for, and hey, they need me. They're not
So
going to hit their goal without me. So it does take time,
I
I think.
think that, well, what it is that, I mean, last year I did 172 interviews, and so people have said they've seen me everywhere. All of last year, a lot of people who I didn't know were like, I've seen you everywhere when I've asked them to be on the show. But I also think that what I've discovered is I've discovered a few things in comics. I've discovered that almost everybody's broke. You know,
There's
everybody's
that.
almost broke. Everybody also says, well, I'm on all these other shows. And my question to all these people is, what is the conversion? And that's the question that I think people don't know how to answer. And I've also noticed that people view media the same. I'm on other people's shows all the time talking about other topics, and people are like, "You're a different guest." I didn't realize in mid-interview they're like, "Oh snap! Like you actually come prepared." And
Mhm.
so I think that there's a lot of misconceptions because there's a lot of shows out there, and there's a lot of things, and also people. And I've gotten the criticism where they're like, "Oh, your YouTube isn't great." Yeah, because I primarily focus on Facebook because you all promote in all these groups. So why wouldn't I go on the platform where you're all at that platform? And I'm also focusing primarily on Instagram now as well. And I'm increasing my Instagram visibility because why wouldn't I go where everybody's at? I'm not worrying about the YouTube side of things because, well, Facebook and Instagram really are the kings. And then I focus on Twitter. So that's kind of where I'm at. And also this round, I didn't do much interviews just because I've been having a pushed January where like legitimately the last 26 days I've been running on adrenaline completely. But it's also that. And I got on and it was just constant pushing and hitting up people I knew. And I just think that also people are just broke from January. And I've
Yeah.
also discovered that a lot of people don't have control over their brand. I've discovered something very, very interesting in comics where I would say that about one third of my audience doesn't have control over their finance brands on what they can tweet and what they can push out. They could do an interview fine, but a lot of people don't have full control over their brand. And it's a very weird situation that you discover that. And they didn't tell me that, but they're like, I can't share your project. Your business is not my brand, is the response I've gotten.
Right.
And that has been one of the most shocking components of what I've learned in the last 26 days.
Yeah.
Very weird position for me to be in, but I digress.
No, you get that with a lot. I think sometimes people try so hard to build their own followings and brands, even that, they don't want to go off brand at all to, plug somebody else or help them out. That happens too. You get sometimes personality types that are like that, whether it's contractual, whether they just feel it's not in their self interest. But then you get plenty of people who aren't that way, and we can throw arms around each other. And I think that's
It's
the way it has to be.
I mean, the official response, at least for me, and the personal response is that there's a bunch of people who I've helped them and I pushed out their shit, and you're not pushing out my shit. You're
Right.
not getting me as a backer anymore. You're not getting on my show first and foremost. You will get on my show as a back end if I need somebody to fill in and it works out, but I'm not bending over backwards for you. And this is how you're gonna lose me. And I'm not gonna name names, but it's official. And one of the things that's actually happened now, and I was speaking with Preston last night about this, is that I've actually taken 50 interviews off the table and moved them over to my cosplay side. Where this year I was going to do about 25, and I actually decided to up because those people actually share our content and they actually are willing to agree with an Instagram collaboration, which allows me to get into their networks. And when somebody has 20,000 Instagram followers, I mean, that's sort of what's happened in my world in the last 26 days. It's a very weird position to be in because I've changed. But if you're decent and you actually share out my content, you know, and that's what I think is a bigger problem. That's what I've learned. It's a really super weird concept for me as being on Kickstarter, because I thought people talk about the community, and a lot of people have been really good, but there's been a lot of people who I thought were going to be better.
Yeah, it's tough. I've learned to never expect anything in return. Like I've pledged to people that haven't pledged back. Probably, it's tough too because there's other people who I don't know, I don't have an interaction with. They might have pledged to me. I don't know them. Maybe I'm not interested in their book. And that's the tough thing too, is sometimes, everyone has a different view. Like sometimes you think, oh, you're my friend, so you should back my project, but someone else might have the view that, I don't actually want that book. Nothing against you. I love you. I just don't want the book. So it's tough. And I think there's a lot of different perspectives and opinions on that.
It's the idea, and I'm going to call out my friend a little bit, but Larry Higgins, who does Niobe, he puts up posts saying we're all competing for the dollar. And look, I'm a capitalist. I think Larry's a capitalist, and I don't mind calling him out a little bit. And he was commenting, and he's a good friend to some degree, and I really like his book. I think he is half right about that on Kickstarter. And this goes back to my point is that because on Kickstarter, people sometimes back Kickstarter. Look, and I'm gonna throw them a dollar. Because guess what? That dollar for me giving you nothing, or you don't have to give me anything, might go a long way because if 30 people give you a dollar, that's 30 bucks closer to your goal. And that's something
Right.
that, if you feel you can't back everybody's project at a $20 pop, what if you threw everybody a buck instead? Or what if you said, hey, I'm gonna pick 5 projects and you random number generate it, right? You don't even care what the project is, because that's what BackerKit does, right? Doesn't BackerKit, if you use them, throw you a dollar in your
Yeah,
Kickstarter?
I don't use it, but I know it has its own fees, so I can't speak to it.
So no. I think like there's like the BackerKit Collective, and they've backed I think the most Kickstarter campaigns ever. And
Yeah.
so one of the things that they've done and they utilize is that they throw you a dollar into your campaign just to get you started. And like they do it instantly, they have it on autopilot. And it sounds ridiculous. And you're like, oh, it's only a dollar. That's not going to get me funded. But you know what it is? I'm sure there's been projects that dollar has pushed somebody over the edge of getting funded. And so, it's not that hard, everybody. That's all I'm going to say on that front. But I do want to talk about other things beyond that. I do want to show this cover off. Obviously, this is a cover. It's a super cool cover, and it's a very action-driven cover. And we have a broken city, and we have some rocket launchers, some machine guns, some shit just went down. And then I think this is either the front of the cover or is that the back of the cover for cover B.
That is front cover. So basically, the one you showed and the both of those first two are options: cover A, cover B, and then the back cover is that third one you were showing.
So that's the back of it. And so obviously there's a lot of cool stuff going on. And so obviously you could pick which one you want. And then you could get, I think, all of, issue one, which is, I'm not too sure which one. It's this one for the issue one, and then there's this cover that's the modified version. And I know there's a story behind this because I commented on this book and you threw it out to the Facebook community, which one was sort of better, I think.
Yeah, I think the majority lean toward the red, but people really appreciate the orange.
Yeah. So what was that like? Because I'm a strong believer that sometimes you need to tell your audience what they want and what they need to consume. And sometimes you also need to ask their opinion when you're doing covers. Obviously, one of the things that when I send out my backer surveys and all that stuff, I say, hey guys, what do you need as far as media and podcasting and all that stuff? because what would benefit you as a customer, but also I know certain things that, you know, should be in this campaign regardless of whether my audience needed it or not. So what was that like really throwing that out? Because I think people really appreciate saying, hey, which are you leaning towards?
I think when it comes to a lot of companies nowadays, it used to be that you always had to pay money to find out what people thought of stuff. Now you just throw it on social and ask. Even if you're in the outline stage, like, hey, would you rather see a cover with a guy like this, or would you rather see a cover, like, I mean, it's kind of, I think, giving the people a chance to weigh in, it spark that engagement, and you also can probably give them more of what they want.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to be at some point after I get all my finances, because I'm in between jobs at the moment. I'm going to be doing some comics, and I'm just going to be cover centric. There's certain things I'm not asking my audience on because I know they're going to love it and they're going to be beyond thankful. But I also think that I'm going to throw out feelers to people and say, hey, which one do you like more? What do you sort of feel with this? And I think it's very important because I think also that gets people vested into who you are as an individual.
Definitely.
And I think it's important that people understand that. But I also think there's a time and place for it. Um, but even going back to the rewards, you get issues 1 and 2 digitally. You can get issues 3 and 4 digitally. You can get all of them digitally. You can get covers at 3 and 4 physical and 1 and 4, 1 through 4 digital. Obviously, you could get sort of cover B, same deal. You get everything physical. You get the physical and the digital package. You get the bar. You could get We Are Americans. And there's a variety of other stuff. You get pretty much anything you want from Intelligent and comics, give or take. And if there's not something that you want from you guys, I'm sure there's a way that you could get it for them. And then also what I like is that you have retail packages and you have a variety of them. And the reason why I like this is that every once in a while on Kickstarter, if that creator allows me to do it, I like to buy a retail package because I do sell on eBay. And I
Sure.
like to pick up other things where I am not an official comic store, but I have an eBay store. And I like to stock up my eBay store with different merch because you never know who's coming through your store and things connect to each other. So I sell a lot of Zenescope books. I sell a lot of Bad Girl art. And when a creator has that or has covers like that, that tends to do well in my store. But even going further, you also want to sell to comic shops because there are people who will never ever come on Kickstarter. So what is that like? Really providing this book and then providing anything from Intelligent Comics for a store to pick up at various price points, signed, unsigned, and everything in between, because it is a different beast when you start going into comic shops, and that big pledges can push you over.
Well, you always want the health of the comic shops. You want the comic shop to exist. So, for me, a couple of retailers had reached out and, asked me if I could create something kind of for them. And for me, I'm happy to do that. Not much to it aside from you're just servicing a different segment that wants to be serviced.
Yeah, and also one of the things is that, and most people I think don't understand this, and I'm on the comic book investing side of this entire trade, is you have to find the right price point to sell to at a comic store, because I'm a little bit different because I'm an eBay store, and so when I'm looking to pick up comics to sell, it has to be at a certain price point because I do have to pay 13% eBay fees. There is shipping. There's a variety of other things. I also have to, typically it will sit in my eBay store. Most books, and I've only done this twice on a retail package, will sit in my eBay store from anywhere from 6 to 2 years on average. And that's just the way it is because people come through my eBay store and it's a little bit different than a comic shop. But also, they need to make money because it does take up retail space. A book you might say, oh, somebody has 10 of your books on a spinner rack. Well, that's 10 books that they could have put something else on that spinner rack. And so it's very important. I think that a lot of creators understand that. And I feel that a lot of creators actually don't understand the entire metrics of a comic shop. and the business elements of it. And it's a very complicated thing for me because I'm on the opposite side of this as an investor and as somebody who actually sells a lot of comics every year, you know. And so, what is that like for you understanding all that? Because I think it's a common problem in the comic community, and I see it way too much.
Well, it's something that Marvel understands. It's something that the bigger businesses understand. Us smaller guys, just if you don't have a working understanding of retail, the fact that you have to, wholesale something so that they can in turn sell it, then that's true across the board. It's true at Kroger. It's true at Big Ben's Comics. It's true anywhere. So you just have to know that.
Yeah, no, it's very important. I'm trying to work out a deal with somebody, and there's certain books they need to sell me at a certain price point, otherwise the deal can't persist because it's also the risk reward factor, and it's very interesting. But then also, as I stated, there's a bunch of variants for 21 AD for the first issues 1 and 2 package that are included in this. There's also the ability to get drawn into the comic. I think the original art is still available for some of this. And then there's pretty much a package for everything minus the original art. And so there's a lot of different ways people can pledge to this and pick up anything from, I think, just basically the first 2 issues all the way up to everything and then some. And so obviously, I think it's very important to give people as much choice as humanly possible when you are providing a Kickstarter at every price point.
Yeah, definitely.
And so obviously I want to stop right there as far as rewards, and you got a lot of stuff going on with that, but I do want to talk about comics, conventions, Kickstarter, and all that fun stuff. So obviously, I think last time I checked, you're in Michigan Midwest, right?
Yeah, I don't have a ton to say when it comes to that. I want to be at more cons, conventions, that sort of thing. When COVID hit, as when I was gonna start doing that, and then my comfort level has been kind of like back and forth, kind of as COVID has been back and forth. For
Well,
me,
let's talk about that
sure,
because
sure.
for starters, what is your experience with conventions? Because obviously, and I'll just tell you where I'm at. I have never tabled at a con. I have presented panels. I've done about 50 panels at cons. So I've lectured to groups of 1, and I've lectured to groups of about 300. And so that's my experience on a professional level. Is that I've done about 50 of those. And then I've been to cons as a fan. I've stood in line for Stan Lee. I've stood in line for hours for signatures with comic people, and I've gone to a lot of cons. I've gone to like 35 to 40 cons in my entire career, but I haven't gone since COVID hit. And so I don't know what it's like to table at a con versus the other stuff, and I'm curious what your experience is.
I've done certain appearances. I've been to more cons as a fan than a creator. But like I say, that's largely due to the fact that when I was getting ready to make a big push for that, that's when COVID came. So just speaking with other creators that do a lot, it can be tough. I think it depends on the con. Every con, it could be $100 for a table, it could be $500 for a table. You could be in a scenario to where you're, barely breaking even or making your money back. If you have to pay for travel, like, you're out of state, probably you're losing money. So I think the main point of cons for a lot of creators is to be amongst the people, get their book, get their work out there, have people know about them, look them up, gain a following from it. For some people, are they profitable? Sure, but they're the same people that are profitable in many other ways and avenues. I think so. For a lot of the indie community, I would say do cons, grow into it, do it at your own pace. Do your local one first, see how that goes. If it makes sense to expand, then at your pace, do that.
Because one of the things is that I'm eventually going to produce a book, but I have no desire to go back to a convention. I just don't. And the reason why is that table costs are expensive. And I think I could throw that money into a Facebook ad and get the exact same results or better. Or I could pump it into my project and it's not a 1-to-1 exchange. It's like a 1.8 exchange for me, where I am for every $100 that I pump into my project, I get a return of $180 back. And so for me, that's two. And then I've become more into the digital pivot where I'm not saying cons are going obsolete, but I want to sell to the world. I can reach anybody in the world on eBay at this point, or in the US alone. I mean, there's 350 million people in the United States. And I'm more interested in saying, hey, let me just drop a picture on Facebook or Instagram, come up with a really catchy headline, and then drop it, and then there you go. Or better yet, do you like cows? And you put your Kickstarter link right below that and you run that as a Facebook ad. And if you don't think that Facebook ad won't convert, oh, it will, because I've done it. It's a bizarre Facebook ad, but it's the idea that I'm in digitalization pivot 2.0. And so I don't feel like cons are effective. Even on a networking level, I really don't think they're effective because I've never made money from a con. And I'm paddling, I've never made a connection. I booked only 10 interviews at a con. And all the stuff that I booked in the last 9 years has been through emailing and communicating on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and in Tumblr. So it's a very weird world and I mean, we're talking almost a decade of me doing this now. So I'm in a very different boat than everybody else. And when COVID hit, it was very much a blessing in a lot of ways because I was sort of already there, and it forced me to continue to go there and basically do what I'm doing right now on steroids. So that's why I'm very curious how people think, because I don't see the opposite side, and that's where I'm very confused. And I just saw somebody saying, is a con supposed to provide you a chair at a table? And like, I don't know if you saw that post, and I don't know who put it up, and I'm not trying to embarrass him, but it's a good question. It's a really good question.
I'm not seeing any of the questions. If there's any that have been
Oh,
asked.
no, not. You put it up in a Facebook group, like maybe like 2 hours ago.
Oh, okay. Yeah, whatever. When you pay a fee, typically you do get a table, a chair, but
it's the fact that even was asked, it sort of gives me a sense that's a weird question to ask. Meaning that because I was under the impression with that it was a given, but I look further down the road with that position where I'm like, what does this actually mean as far as profitability and sales and things of that nature? And if people have questions like this, are cons really healthy for people to go back to and as a money stream revenue and even a networking stream revenue position? Because if creators aren't making money at cons, why would they go network there if they're not making money? It's kind of like why I'm very anti going back, because I'm not making any connections, I'm not making any money. So why would I naturally go back?
Yeah, that's fair. On some level, if you're a company, it might make a little bit more sense than if you're an individual creator, because if there's a big event and let's just say it's Chicago or something, and hey, these 8 big companies are there. Is your company there? That might be why. It might not be the economics of it. It might just be for the outreach. But I don't have anything to say about it, positive or negatively. I definitely, like you articulated, get all the reasons why somebody do it, and that's fine.
And then going even further, because obviously I think we covered COVID, where you're up and down, and I'm very similar, where I'm letting all the chips fall because I don't know what to put on. And I was talking about Anime NYC, which is the thing that the White House was talking about back in like December, when it was like the second case of Omicron. And I said, we're going to see what happens at Anime NYC. You put 25 to 30,000 anime fans together, something's coming out of that con. And I said it in July on my show, and people thought I was crazy. And all the people who thought I was crazy, I don't think I was off base, because something did come out of it. Because when you put 30,000 people in a non-well ventilated convention center, you're going to get something, especially with COVID not calming down. So, I mean, I'm just waiting until the chips fall for a lot of reasons. And primarily, I just don't want COVID. I really don't.
Yeah, I think for me, I it's tough, right? Because part of really wanting to reach out to people is to be able to interact with them in a safe way, and it's hard at cons too, because the nature of COVID, everybody's just masked and they're keeping their distance and everything. So it makes the whole experience tougher. I don't blame anybody for not wanting to do it. And the other side is, economically, like if a con's not going to be at full capacity, or people aren't going to really take the time to want to interact with you, I do get the side of it that's like, okay, maybe we should
So
be waiting for a later time.
I'm going to ask you a question. This is actually something for me. I like looking at people's faces. I judge, and this is how I function. Where I like going through people's the way their mouth moves, the way their eyes move. I like seeing their nose because that creates a sense of trust or distrust for me. And it's just the way my body works. Is that body language means something to me? Speech means something to me. Seeing how you speak means something to me. And it sounds all weird what I'm saying, but we all do it. And if I'm speaking to somebody and something is off-putting about how they're speaking to me, or I'm seeing the way their mouth is moving or their tonality, I back off. Or you can sell me when I see your whole face because you can create a sense of warmth or trust. And with a mask, it's very hard to do that. And there is a lack of trust, I feel. And so I would imagine as an indie creator, you have to get me to trust your book if I never heard about it before. You have to
Right.
sell it to me. And if you're wearing a mask, that's harder in a lot of ways. And even if you have a fun, cool mask, it is harder in a lot of ways. And so I think that's also a big thing. And I think people don't think about it when they go to cons, is that it's like you now have to work double hard.
Yeah, it's true. It's true on, the buyer side of wanting to connect with them, but it's also true on their side of just like looking at you, and you're just a person with a mask. You're a set of eyes to them. Are they taking the time to be, looking at you as a person who they should stop and talk to too? So that's spot on.
It's also the idea that if I'm in a mask, and I wish I had a mask around me because it would prove the point. Right now, you can see when I'm excited about something. You can see when I'm not. You can see when I'm a little bit confused on something or I'm very hesitant. It's very easy to see my body. But if I'm like this speaking to you, and I know it's hard to hear, you can't see minus my eyes. So if I'm very monotone, you can't see if I'm smiling. A little bit you can because my cheeks move a little bit, but you can't, and it changes the dynamic. And so it's very interesting that whole conversation. And then the final thing I want to talk about, at least here, before I give you a chance to promote, is and we spoke about Kickstarter being a very cool community, and I agree because I find that Kickstarter is amazing as far as technology goes and what they're doing, and the fact that a bunch of people, and like 6 people who don't know me and have never had an Wednesday at like 11:45 with me half intoxicated. So that was kind of cool. But and Pat Shannon writes for Zenoscope. He does, I think that's in New York. But the idea is that I've never had an interaction with Pat Shan. So that's my first interaction with Pat Shan. I just threw him back in my Kickstarter for $10. But where do you think Kickstarter's going? Because the last 2 years has been a gravy train waterfall with Kickstarter. People received a lot of money when COVID first came with stimulus checks, and there's been a lot more projects on Kickstarter. And there's going to get to a point, unless there isn't, where it's not going to be sustainable. And I'm curious how you feel about that because I could be wrong on that complete thing and I get flack from it. But I think there's going to be a point where this thing is going to sort of break down and there's going to be less projects on, and that is not going to be what has been sort of the runaway train in the last 2 years.
So it really just depends. If somebody's going to back a book on Kickstarter and they're going to spend $15, what are they not doing instead? Are they not going to a movie that month? Are they, not buying fast food? Are they not buying something at a comic shop and they're buying it on Kickstarter instead? I would think it's sustainable. And the other thing is, what you might have instead happen is just people are more selective, right? I back 10 Kickstarters. I don't get one fulfilled, and that ruins an experience there, or I get them all fulfilled, but there's only like two of those creators I really like. So do I then just follow those creators and back their future projects? So I think I think there's probably room for everyone. And the way that we're competing is just competing for the attention, right? So has somebody heard of you? hey, here's this person that seems to have a really popular Kickstarter. Here's this one that doesn't. It's no secret that people like to move in crowds of what's hip and what's in and what everyone else is doing. So
Until
those,
they have a bad experience and then they shift and then the market corrects. So if somebody backs 15 of somebody's projects and the 16th one they have a shitty experience, they will then move in a different direction and people will deviate. And then further down the road, deviations will further happen. And then, that's kind of what happens a lot. And that happens to me. I'm sure it's happened to you on Kickstarter.
well, but I think that there's always going to be kind of a replenishment in the sense of, there's somebody 18 today that will not go on Kickstarter or back a project for 4 more years, right? It won't be until they're 22. Not
Oh,
because they
I
have
didn't mean leave the platform. I mean that, like, if somebody had a bad experience with me, they might go to another podcaster at that point.
Sure, sure, sure.
So what I mean is the free market will solve the issue. So if I back, I love Merc Magazine and I think they do a great job. But let's say I back 10 Merc magazines. They're not going to get angry with me if I say this. But on the 11th, when I have a bad experience, and then I might go to another company. And I didn't leave Kickstarter. My dollar goes to another place because I've had a bad experience. And that happens all the time in business. And that's what I think it will eventually happen on Kickstarter is that your track record and also did your last Kickstarter outperform, not money wise, but value wise,
Right.
the one before it? Meaning that is it superior work? Is it the same quality work? Did the artwork deteriorate and did the experience and value remain the same, whether you funded $5,000 or $6,000? Because you could have an issue 2 that just doesn't do as well as an issue 1, or you could have an issue 2 that beats the shit out of issue 1.
I agree.
And that's something that I think is going to happen. But we've been speaking for an hour and a half, and I do want to give you a chance for self promotion because you do have your Kickstarter going on. You're 1/3 through. I think you got like at least 20 days, if not more. I think.
Yeah, I believe we launched, just maybe 7, 8 days ago. So yeah, we should still have over 20 days. If you like any kind of futuristic sci-fi kind of stories told from unique perspectives, I would say check this project out. There's probably a tier for everybody, which I think is important. So feel free. If you go on Kickstarter, you hit 2100 AD. I'm sure it will come up that way. You could definitely check out any links that Andrew might provide, and my page too. But there's samples on the Kickstarter that you can click on and see PDFs of every intelligent comic, at least a few pages from them, so you get an idea of what they're like, what they read like. So hopefully that helps too.
Yeah, and obviously I put a Kickstarter link up there in the description, so you can click that up. Whether you're watching on YouTube, whether you're watching on Facebook, or you can check that out. Also, though, where can people find you on Twitter, Facebook pages, Instagram? Because all that stuff matters just as much. Website, because I know you got a website, and certain things like who's watching is not, I think, on the Kickstarter. And so there's a variety of other stuff, and then there's some other variants. And somebody might just want a particular variant, and they might not want to spend all the big money on the Kickstarter for that variant, which I think is also up on your website. So where can people find all that stuff?
Yep. So intelligentcomics.com, that's kind of like the central hub. That will take you to somewhere where you can subscribe or sign up for any email or news. That'll give links to our Kickstarter, anything that we have active that way, or social media too.
Yeah, and everybody, what you have to do, and I've been saying it, and I'm going to keep saying it, is you got to support indie content creators, indie comic creators, and the best way to do that is actually backing their Kickstarters, where you're throwing in $1 or you're throwing in 5, 10, 20, or $50, or however much you would like to throw in. It all matters, and it all helps make these projects work and occur. Because again, we're not DC Marvel, we're not Image, and every dollar goes into making these projects possible, whether that's art, printing, or anything else pertaining to it. Obviously, money goes a long way. But furthermore, and I get it, money's tight. There's a lot of projects out there. You should be following people on Twitter, checking out their website, checking out their Facebook pages, liking their Instagram, actually sharing out their content. And if you can't throw money at it, share it into a Facebook group because you don't know who's watching, you don't know who's checking it out. And every little bit of information goes a long way. I put on my Facebook saying, look, a share goes a long way. You know, if my entire audience just shared out my Kickstarter, it would go such a long way. And I said, hey, my friend Rob Matari said, I can't back everybody's Kickstarter. And I said in the comments, hey, man, a share goes a long way in my book. And I would imagine it does in yours as well. So obviously, sharing out this campaign goes a long way. And it does matter. And you should be sharing it out that you backed it once you did back it, because that also gives further confidence to the project and lets other people know, saying, hey, I backed this, you should back it too. Um, Now about me and what I'm pushing out there, obviously use Mixum if you need to print your books and you're not happy with your printer, please use Mixum. As far as getting comic supplies, I like my comic books to be protected, and I use bags and boards. I also like when I back Kickstarters for my comic to be bag and boarded, and bags and boards are expensive. So use Pop Anime Comics at checkout with BCW supplies. Bags, I think, are 14 bucks, and boards are like $16. So for 100 of them, you're going to be spending 30 bucks, and 10% off is a $3 savings. And if you buy in bulk and you want BCW supplies, buy 500 bucks, that's 50 bucks you just saved. You're welcome. And then finally, my Kickstarter's up. So if you want to get on my show, you want a guaranteed guest spot, I've started actually sending out my Calendly link to people, and spots are filling up. And so if you want a guaranteed spot, because it is becoming very much invitation only on my show, that is the way to do that. Or better yet, if you got a product or if you want to advertise your book on my show, you can pick up live reads, or you can pick up a bunch of them, and we could work out how you want to break that up, because I'm willing to break it up over 2, 3, 4 Kickstarters if you have them. But you could shoot me a DM, or you could check it out and we could figure it out on the back end. And I promise I will take care of you. If you back any one of my tiers on my Kickstarter, you'll be taken care of. So on that note, I'm going to give you the final word.
Just make sure you check out either the website or the Kickstarter. Every pledge helps. It helps us hit our goal. And thank you guys for tuning in.
Couldn't say any better myself, and I believe that is a wrap.
Thanks for having me.